Hi everyone, my name is Ellie Andrews and I'm the UC Cooperative Extension Specialty Crops Advisor for Sonoma, Marin, and Napa counties. And today I'm going to be talking about Integrated Pest Management, or IPM for short, for Symphylans. So to begin with, what are Symphylans? So they are elongate white myriapods or centipede-like arthropods with long antennae, as you can see here in this photo. They tend to be approximately half an inch long with 11 to 12 pairs of legs when they're fully grown. Unfortunately, they have quite a few hosts, so their hosts include brassicas, solanaceous crops, cucurbits, root crops, and some leafy greens. From the growers that I've been talking with a lot about this pest, they're reporting that the most susceptible crops tend to be root crops, so things like carrots and beets especially, followed by other crops like eggplant, sweet potato, brassicas, cucurbits, solanaceous crops. However, less susceptible crops include things like beans, lettuce, alliums, cover crops, and certain grains. And unfortunately, weeds can also be hosts, so that's something to bear in mind. So Symphylans feed on living roots, sprouting seeds, and fungal hyphae. Their feeding damage causes root death, gnarled root appearance, corky tissues, and older roots especially. And a really big one here is plant stunting. So that's what we can see, initially from above ground. And unfortunately, they also increase the susceptibility of these plants to soil-borne pathogens as well. So here's a really nice photo comparison from an excellent article I'd highly recommend from ATRA, and I have a link at the end of this presentation to that. But as you can see here on the left photo, there's a stunted eggplant that's been attacked by Symphylans. And on the right, we've got an undamaged eggplant in the same field. So same location, same crop. And so you can really see that the stunting can be pretty dramatic. So Symphylans cause patchy distributions of symptoms in the field. They often occur in hotspots and can be several square feet wide or several acres wide in terms of the damage and the above ground symptoms. So these photos, also from the article I mentioned, really illustrate that very, very nicely here, where we have, patchy symptoms in the field. So they create this really dramatic, distinctive circular pattern of crop stunting. And, several growers I've talked to have described this as a circle of death, where your crops start to become, smaller and smaller, while other ones around it keep growing. The smaller ones don't really progress as much, and in some cases they don't emerge at all, or they end up dying completely. And this is what this looks like on a larger scale. These are some photos from John Umbel and Jim Leap in larger fields where these symptoms can be really severe across a large scale as well as a small scale. And here's a really nice photo of that as well. So thinking about timing and conditions, there tend to be high numbers often observed in April or May, especially during rainy springs, unfortunately, like what we've been having this year and last year. So thinking about soil moisture, Symphylans tend to occur in heavier soils with high irrigation. They like water, they like moisture. They may even be spread by flooding in fields. They're really common in alluvial soils in California, and they tend to congregate in that upper soil layer when conditions are warm and moist. So just things to bear in mind when it comes to climate. So just a quick anecdote here from Jim Leap, who's a retired UCSC farm manager. Many of you probably know him. So he mentioned that really there weren't much reductions in Symphylans populations that were observed following the wet winter in 2022 to 23 and the cool spring there. So at that time, and it really seems that this weather may have encouraged Symphylans. So even though we know generally what kind of conditions they prefer, we do need more research, more information about how temperature and rainfall might affect this pest. So just bear in mind, we know some things about, the conditions that encourage this pest to proliferate, but we also do need more research on it too. So, thinking more about the conditions that Symphylans love, unfortunately, Symphylans cause problems in organic systems that have high soil organic matter, plant residue incorporations, or plant residues on the soil surface, and non-decomposed organic matter. So Symphylans are more often associated with good soil structure compared to soils that are compacted or sandy, which is really unfortunate because we work so hard to create these great soil health conditions. And unfortunately, that is also the environment that Symphylans really thrive in. So as Rex Defer with Atra said recently, ironically, they could be considered the single pest that is an indicator of good soil management where soil aggregation and soil organic matter are high. So symphylans are also very mobile in the soil, which adds another layer of complexity here, which makes them pretty challenging to manage in some cases. So they rely on soil pore spaces made by roots and other organisms to move around. They're really vertically mobile in the soil profile through soil pores, cracks, and channels. Symphylans need well-aggregated soil to move, so sandy soils tend to generally be less hospitable for symphylans, and they can be found up to 3 feet and below in the soil surface. Also, all life stages occur in the soil, so symphylans molt in the deeper soil layers and then migrate up to the root zone to feed. And these are some really great photos from that article I mentioned where, on the far left, we've got symphylans eggs, and then they emerge. And you can see the baby ones in the middle there, and then the full-grown version on the far right here. So this is how their life cycle works. And as they mature, they end up moving upwards towards the soil surface where the plant roots are found and organic matter are found. They can decompose, or they can feed on and decompose. So what is integrated pest management? What do we do about this pest? So IPM, or integrated pest management, is a process that you can use to solve pest problems while minimizing risks to people and the environment. So IPM can be used to manage all kinds of pests anywhere in any situation. So it's really a big picture toolbox approach. So, we think about all of these different strategies we have at our disposal, and you're going to choose a combination of strategies that make sense for your context. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's what are all the different options you could consider and which ones are appropriate for your situation. So we usually start at the bottom of this pyramid here, thinking about identification and understanding the pest biology, and then moving upwards into these different categories like cultural control, sanitation, mechanical control, biological, and then you'll see chemical is reserved at the top of the pyramid, meaning if you try lots of different things, lots of different combinations of other strategies first, and it still doesn't work, you still need other options, then you consider chemical control farther up that pyramid. So it's not where you turn first. First you start at the base and then move upward. So for symphylans, what does this look like? A toolbox approach for this pest includes all of these things that I'm going to talk through briefly here. So we've got prevention, first and foremost, great place to start. Monitoring, strategic tillage. In some cases, of course, that doesn't work in a no-till farm. Mild to moderate compaction, but potato rotation has been shown to be really effective at reducing symphylans levels following that rotation of potatoes. Also limiting undecomposed residues, moderating organic matter inputs, especially for farms that are really doing a lot of compost applications or other organic matter inputs. Using transplants to give your plants a head start, overplanting to sort of compensate for the damage you know is going to happen. Sanitizing farm equipment, especially when you move between fields. Biological control and insecticides and oil-based products. So we're going to go through this all in a little bit more detail, but just know you have a lot of different strategies you could pull from, and you don't have to do all of them. So just always remember that you don't put too much pressure on yourself. You don't have to do everything. Just choose the strategies that are appropriate for your context and your specific goals and constraints at your farm. So starting with prevention, in problem areas, you can consider planting tolerant crops like beans, small grains, spring oak cover crops. So crops that are a little bit more tolerant of symphylans. If they're known to be an issue in the area, you could consider moderating your organic matter inputs, especially of fresh plant residues. Since we know that would encourage them, we're just going to limit it a little bit more to whatever degree you're able to. Another big one is monitoring. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about monitoring symphylans damage. Generally, you just want to keep track of which fields have symphylans issues, which ones seem to be okay, and consider making a map. This could be a simple sketch, or if you have access to drone imagery, like you can see here, this upper right photo really shows symphylans damage in a field. And that photo was taken, in, let's see, May 2022. And the one at the bottom was just taken like last week in April 2024. So, the time of year and the particular year and your strategies that you used the year before, all of these things really influence how these symptoms show up or don't show up. But if you are able to keep good records, you can go back and look and see, what the symptoms look like, how bad they were, and where, and try to understand how your management strategies affect Symphylans symptoms in the field. And you can also include, maps of the potato bait test results that I'm going to talk about in a moment too. So that's one of your tools for monitoring. So if you can see Symphylans in the soil before planting, it means that they are numerous enough to cause economic damage. So if you just take a shovel or a trowel and dig up some soil and you can see the Symphylans there, that's a pretty big problem, and it would make sense to think through these strategies and choose a combination of strategies that will help reduce their population levels before planting, ideally. So, that's always a quick, easy way to check. But you can also do something called a bait test, or I'm going to refer to it as a potato test. So just before planting in the spring, you want to use bait trapping to monitor garden Symphylans and determine population levels that are present in the field. So this can be really helpful to compare symptomatic areas with nearby high-performing areas. If you think you might have Symphylans in this area and it looks, like there's some stunting, or there was last year, versus a nearby area that was really productive and looked fine, that's a great place to start, where you could do some potato baits in one area, the symptomatic area, potato baits in a productive area, and just see, is my problem Symphylans or maybe it's something else. So how do you do this? You want to start by installing potato slices on the soil surface. So here's what that looks like. So after a recent irrigation or rainfall event, you're going to cut raw potatoes, beets, or carrots in thick slices. So these are all the things that Symphylans love to munch on. Then you're going to rake away the upper dry soil layer until the moist soil is exposed beneath it. Then you're going to scratch the cut surface of the potato immediately before you put it on the moist soil surface. And then, just be careful when you're moving soil around. You don't want to disturb the soil pore spaces or block them, because that would prevent Symphylans from reaching to the bait. So just do this kind of carefully, raking away the soil surface, like with a lettuce knife or something like that. And then you want to use at least one bait trap per acre. Ideally more than that for small farms. You can get more detail by using more baits. So, it's up to you how many and where, but just bear in mind, you probably want at least one per acre, probably more for small farms. And I just wanted to include this really cool note from Tessa Henry, Cliff Family Farm. She said that she's used beets for this, and she thinks it's, pretty cool to see that Symphylans actually turn pink or red on the inside. And I think, from an educational perspective, since I know a lot of my farmers also do have a pretty big educational component to their farms, this could be a really fun and interesting activity as well. Just to say, like using a beet, for instance, just makes these Symphylans much more visible and easier to see, because they are pretty small and they're also potato colored. So that's just something to bear in mind if you're having trouble, or if you want to do some potatoes, some beets. That could be really interesting to see what works best for you, visibility wise. So then after that, you're going to cover the bait weight. So you're going to cover the potato slices or beet slices with a cup to protect them from drying out. You're going to make sure the cup is large enough to prevent excessive heating in the area or to accumulate a lot of condensation. A cup or white plastic pot that doesn't have any drainage holes or anything, about 6 by 6 inches more or less is adequate. You're going to cover that with a stone or some soil or something to hold it down and prevent the wind from removing it. And you're going to leave the bait in place for 24 to 36 hours. And then you're going to remove the cover and count all the Symphylans on the potato slice. Hopefully there's not that many, but you're going to record it and make sure for this location, the spot, we had 2 per slice versus 5 in this other area versus 20. So it could be really highly variable. We know this is a pest that pops up in hot spots and patches. So from there, you're going to count the soil surface first, because they're going to run away very quickly. They're really fast, it turns out. So it's easier if you start with the soil and just count how many are there, and then look at the potato slice and the cup, the inside of the cup, and count from there. So you want the total number of Symphylans in the soil and the bait in the cup. If any are present on the bait, you could get significant stand loss. So really, if any of them are present, even if you just see 1 or 2, you still want to take action. This is really helpful if the problem isn't Symphylans. This will rule it out for you, and that maybe it's nutrients, water, maybe it's soil-borne pathogen, something else. So hopefully the answer is no, 0, but you want to write down what you find, and then it'll help you understand what's going on and the cause. So a note on biological control, we know that predatory organisms like predatory mites, ground beetles, centipedes, fungi, like there are some predatory organisms of Symphylans, which is great. And you can consider installing and maintaining insectary plants to attract natural enemies and, you know, think about your system from this larger perspective of who else is living in the soil who might be helping out controlling Symphylans, but just bear in mind that biocontrol alone is not going to be enough to control Symphylans in most cases. But it's worth bearing in mind that there are some natural predators out there. Switching over to mechanical methods now, we're going to talk about tillage. So it is an effective and traditional control strategy for Symphylans specifically. It kills the Symphylans, it destroys their pore spaces that they use to move around in the soil. But we just talked about predators. Unfortunately, tillage can also reduce populations of key predators of Symphylans too, like centipedes and predaceous mites. And over time, tillage does reduce soil organic matter and degrade soil structure if you use it a lot. So when Symphylans are near the soil surface, tillage could provide several weeks of control, but it doesn't really control Symphylans at lower soil depths. And of course, you just want to consider the benefits and soil health trade-offs of tillage. So if you go this route, you just want to be really thoughtful and strategic about how you do this and how often, where, what depth, that kind of thing. Another one is mild to moderate compaction. So this one's interesting. We know Symphylans need those pore spaces to move around, so packing down the soil surface after planting compresses pore spaces that Symphylans use to travel. It can also reduce Symphylans movement through the soil, but again, just like with tillage, be careful not to overdo it, but it can help to some degree. Another really interesting strategy is potato rotations. So it's been shown that using potatoes as a rotation can decrease Symphylans populations after you remove that crop. So in some cases, this can allow other more susceptible crops to be planted after you harvest those potatoes. So here's just a couple of anecdotes from different growers shared with permission. It seems that timing could make a difference with this method. So at a site that had a history of Symphylans, potato rotation showed effectiveness when planting a vegetable crop immediately after harvesting potatoes in the fall. So you move the potatoes out and immediately plant, and you'll probably have some level of control or some benefit from that potato rotation. Also, an interesting note that you could even consider interplanting potatoes with crops to provide some level of control for nearby susceptible crops. And that, just generally a lot of growers have said that planting potatoes before brassicas or other types of crops has been really key. So it's just a strategy to consider, and we actually don't know exactly why this works from a scientific perspective, and I'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end. So another one is, especially for farms who are using a ton of organic matter, you might want to consider limiting organic matter inputs in the areas where you have Symphylans. So you could reduce the input of undecomposed organic matter. That just gives them less food and creates less beneficial conditions, soil moisture, that kind of thing. You might want to consider limiting the organic matter remaining in the field in areas where Symphylans are present or you suspect them to be present. So this means removing crop residues out of the field promptly, not tilling in crop residues where Symphylans are present, and not leaving any unharvested root crops in the field, especially. That's a big one. So basically, we don't want to give them more food. You could also consider waiting to seed or transplant until organic materials have visibly broken down. So some other strategies here, we've got sanitation. So this just means cleaning your farm equipment between going from one field to another and also from one farm to another. So we want to minimize the risk of spreading Symphylans to new areas of equipment. Another strategy is overplanting. So you could consider planting a higher number of seeds or transplants in problem areas to help compensate for anticipated damage. You can always thin it out later if you need to. But I know several growers have used this pretty effectively. Another one is using transplants rather than seeds to help give crops more of a head start. This is just a lovely photo of transplants from Longer Table Farm here, shared with permission. And you could also think about, soil amendments. They really vary greatly in their effects, and reports are often contradictory. So I know that there's some interest out there in like chitin-containing amendments, and there's been a little bit of research done on that, but we really don't have enough science-based information to consider that a viable option. So generally, you want to reduce organic matter amendments inputs. Make sure you sanitize your equipment. You could plant a little bit extra and make sure your transplants have a good, healthy head start. So those are the things that would really help. So, we talked about what integrated pest management is, just circling back around to this idea. These first four levels are things that we've talked about so far. So we're wrapping up here, moving towards chemical options. So I'm going to just focus on the organic options because the vast majority of the growers I work with either are certified organic or use organic management practices. And this is what everyone is telling me they want to know about instead of conventional ones. So we're going to talk about organic insecticides and oil-based products briefly. And in IPM, pesticides really are only used when absolutely needed and in combination with other approaches for more effective long-term control. Okay, so there's a lot of different options you could consider in this area. I'm going to mention some pesticide active ingredients and products, but these are not endorsements by any means. They're just examples that can be used for this pest. The crop system where you intend to use a pesticide product must be listed on the label, so please make sure you read your label very thoroughly and carefully before you apply anything. It has all the information you're going to need in terms of crop system, active ingredient, where to apply, when to apply, how much, all of that good stuff. So it should be on the label. Just take the time to read it. And you always want to make sure that you consult, UCCE IPM for further resources or guidance. You can reach out to me and other advisors, UCCE folks as well if you have questions. So organic insecticides are going to be the most effective if you apply it before planting to the soil because this is a soil-borne pest. So insecticides will kill Symphylans near the surface and allow better root establishment. They can stop spot treatments with insecticides might be adequate in some cases because we know this is a pretty spotty pest. It just shows up in these different patches. But Symphylans that are deeper in the soil might eventually come back up and reinfest the root zone. Like we talked about, they're really vertically mobile. So using a combination of IPM strategies, like I mentioned, is going to provide the highest level of pest control and not just relying on one strategy. And thinking about timing and when the Symphylans are going to be in that upper layer of the soil. Okay, so here's some examples of different products. Azadirachtin-based insecticides. So these are insecticides that have an active ingredient that's been extracted from the neem tree, so it's from a natural source. Pyrethrin-based insecticides. So these have active ingredients found naturally occurring in chrysanthemum flowers, and they provide some low level of control. Again, no silver bullets here. And then we have oil-based products. So these can provide a moderate level of control, and these will have ingredients like clove oil, cinnamon oil, thyme oil, rosemary oil. Okay, so shifting gears, I wanted to give you an example of really effective Symphylans management by Coyote Family Farm. So this is shared with permission. If you want, you can check out their Instagram page. A lot of growers in the region use Instagram and, not only use it as an advertisement opportunity, but also just share really helpful anecdotes and tips. So you can look here for more details. So here was a situation that they encountered. They needed to plant early brassicas in a bed that they knew had some violence. So this was risky. They knew they needed to do it. So their strategies were tilling the soil with a power harrow. Then they added lime to raise the pH, and then they planted. And then they compacted the soil by stepping all over the bed. Okay, so this is in their caption here, and I did check in with them for permission to share. And as you can see in the photo, these plants look great. There's none of the symptoms that we saw earlier in this presentation. No stunting, no patchiness. Everything looks pretty uniform. So Sonia, the farmer there, she mentioned, that intentionally creating extra disturbance through that tillage and compaction is counter to all that we know about good soil management. But in this case, it was the right prescription. So this is just to say that, they used 3 strategies. Out of that long list, they chose 3 strategies. They combined them in a really strategic manner, and it really paid off. So those strategies, compaction, a little bit of strategic, careful disturbance, that does go against like what we know about soil health, but there are some cases with some Symphylans and with other pests where it can't really help. So, as we see here in yellow highlight, this is a great example of integrating multiple strategies, disturbance compaction, and in a way that effectively reduces pest pressure in a specific context. So again, no one-size-fits-all solution. Not everyone has to do this exact thing, but just the process of thinking through, okay, what's going to work on my farm with my goals, my constraints, and that's going to look different for different farmers. So just know you have a lot of strategies and you can pull from that list, that toolbox, however it makes sense for you. So I just want to briefly go over some areas for future research because I think this is fascinating. And when we want to think proactively about what kind of information would be most useful for growers, these are things that growers have communicated to me they're most interested in. So a big one is Symphylans biology and behavior. We really don't know enough about it. We want to know, can you import Symphylans to your site through compost, or do they grow in place as you gradually improve soil health over time? It seems likely that they could be imported in compost and survive kind of like on the edges of compost piles where temperatures are a bit less extreme. So it's a great point made by Jim Leap. Also, is fully decomposed compost less likely to encourage Symphylans population growth compared to the use of like non-decomposed residues? So that's a big question. Why do Symphylans start in hotspots? We really don't know. How does it start? How can we better understand their growth pattern? What determines that? What drives that? We don't have a lot of research on that. How long do the benefits of the potato rotation last in the field? It seems pretty immediate, but how long, how many years can you make that last? In some cases, it might not be that long, but in others, maybe we see the effects for longer. We just aren't really sure. Another big one is, what is the mechanism behind that reduction of Symphylans that we see after potato rotation? We really don't know, but we have some really excellent hypotheses directly from growers. So, maybe just the physical soil disruption involved with harvesting potatoes is what provides that control. Maybe there's a biochemical effect from potatoes. Totally possible. Maybe there's a long-term bait effect. So since there are usually like a small number of potatoes still left in the field after harvest, maybe those leftover potatoes act as baits and distract the Symphylans away from any new transplants. Totally great hypothesis. Maybe it's just removal through the harvested potatoes. Maybe the Symphylans are like actually in the potatoes and then you're moving them out of the field at harvest. So it could be any of these, it could be a combination of them, or maybe something else. But this is an area we do need more research in. Also, some great questions. Maybe solarization or tarping could help. I've heard some anecdotes from different growers saying that they do see reduced Symphylans levels after tarping solarization as well. So that could be an area for more research. And a huge area of interest for a lot of growers I've talked to is biocontrol and natural predators. So, are there any biocontrol options or beneficial predators that could help control Symphylans? We know that they are. There are some naturally occurring predaceous mites, centipedes, ground beetles, but how do we work with them and encourage them more? How much control could we get out of that? Several growers mentioned observing high levels of predatory centipedes, in particular, in beds that also had a lot of Symphylans. So centipedes and ground beetle larvae, we know that they're predators that attack Symphylans, so how can we best promote predatory organisms like this? And also, what are some other soil ecology-oriented approaches to Symphylans IPM and practical tests and tools that growers can use? And lastly, we need some more information to help guide IPM practices on organic essential oil products, organic insecticides, practical and affordable management solutions, science-based research results from randomized and sufficiently replicated trials that are centered around grower-driven research questions. This is really hard to do, randomized replicated field trials because this pest is so patchy, in these different hotspots, but I think this kind of work would be really helpful. And just generally, we want to bear in mind that as more and more growers adopt healthy soil practices throughout California, we're probably going to continue seeing Symphylans pressure increase. This is a great point made by Rex Defer at ATRA as well. So it's good to be thinking about this now proactively. And here are my references. I'm going to link a PDF of this PowerPoint where I post this video. So you should be able to access this. Please just email me if you can't for any reason. I thank you to all of the people, many, many people who have talked to me about this pest over the last year. I really appreciate it. Jim, Lee, Bersufer, Emma Torbert, tons of folks, everyone at Schoen Farm has been so supportive and sharing information as well, communications with a lot of different growers who have experienced managing Symphylans. I've talked to growers through focus groups, through farm visits, emails, phone calls, you name it. So you know who you are out there. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to continuing to work on this pest and try to figure out how we can manage it most effectively. So thanks for listening. You can reach out to me at eandrews@ucanr.edu with any questions. Thanks so much for your time and good luck. Please don't hesitate to reach out.